Hello and welcome back to Jack's Coffee Break. My name is Jack and this is my coffee break. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We are going to be talking about how to build in Planet Zoo, but we're going to be talking about the basics of building in Planet Zoo. So don't mind whatever that is, I'm working on stuff over there. So I've seen a lot of people struggle a little bit with building in Planet Zoo, learning how to use all of the different tools, figure out what they want to build, and then actually build it. So this is hopefully going to help with that a little bit. Today we're going to start off with the real simple basic stuff, mainly because once you understand like the basic tools that you have to your disposal, it gets a lot easier. Because if you're fighting with your controls, it's going to be really difficult to keep your motivation to build the cool thing that you want to build. So today we're just going to be talking about controls. If you already feel confident in your ability to use the controls, this might not be the video for you, but you might enjoy a refresher, or I might show you something you didn't know. So, let's talk about what you have available. First off, I think if we are going to understand how most of this stuff works, we need to understand the underlying mechanics of the game. So I have this bamboo piece, and it's loaded up, and it's facing these particular directions, right? Why is it that when a game piece loads in, it loads in the way that it does? So this sounds like a dumb question, but it's actually fairly important. So if we go into terrain real quick, I'm just gonna do a little bit of sculpting. I'm gonna do a push. So you'll see that there is this line right here. Right? There's this clear, like, delineation. The terrain mesh wants to do that thing. This seems like it's just an artifact of, you know, how the mesh was built and everything like that, and that's because it is. But you'll notice that when we load in a piece, it is almost exactly in line with those lines. So what this is that every single map has an internal grid. There are lines running north, south, east, west, and the game is built around the assumption that that grid exists and that it must be obeyed. So we see that this line is going like this, it's going to intersect with this right here. This grid is built along these edges of the map. So when we load in a piece, it is going to be facing exactly north, south, east, west, and it's going to line up exactly with the grid edges. So this is your internalized grid. And when you build, quote-unquote, on the grid, your grid pieces are also going to line up with that, north, south, east, west. So these act as guidelines. And respecting these guidelines when you're initially building will save you a lot of time, pain, and effort. There are ways to build that have nothing to do with that internalized grid. They're all much more difficult and much more time-consuming. So if you're just starting a zoo, or even if you have most of it built and you're just adding in that last finishing touch building, generally I recommend building your item on the grid completely, and then when it's done, rotating it into the spot that you want it to actually be in. That's number one. That's the internalized grid. Number two, let's talk about angle snap and getting rid of it. So this is your angle snap button. Snap rotation to certain angles. When I don't have angle snap on, and I hold the Z control, it pulls up this circle. And because I'm on a grid piece, it's not going to let me move up and down. It's not going to let me rotate. For example, if I were to pull up, here we go, this piece. So holding down Z just lets me rotate along this. If I were to hit X and pull up the widget, there's this red circle. On a grid piece, I don't get that red circle. You can only move along this green circle. We'll get into that in a moment. But this means that we are only allowed to move along the surface, along the ground. Holding Z allows you to do specific rotations, right? These are all fairly simple things. What angle snap does is, instead of letting you rotate smoothly like this, it forces you to rotate in these 15-degree increments indicated by these little dots. So where the arrow is, that's indicating a dot. It's very simple, very easy. That helps you when you're moving something, rotating it along the grid. Let's say that I build a box like this. Something very simple. But then I want a diagonal cut through this thing. Let's see here, let's use this thing. So now I can use my 15-degree rotation, and I can get a diagonal across it in 15-degree increments. So, very simple thing. Immensely useful. Having grid snap on as a rule and then taking it off for exceptions is going to help speed up the building process, because you're not constantly fighting with, I don't know what angle this was and I don't know why everything is not fitting together correctly. It removes all of those questions. So the next thing we're going to look at is grid size and grid height. So grid height I have set to 4 meters. And because this is a 4-meter piece, it's going to snap to the top right there. Now what this did is it's snapping along 2 meters because that's something incidental to the piece. But if I were to get a bamboo painted wall, it's only going to move along these chunks. I can reduce this grid height to be 2 meters so I can get those incremental stacking. I can move it all the way down to 1 meter, and it's even smoother then. And I can move it down to quote-unquote 0, but you'll notice that there's 2 different 1 meters and 0 meters. So this one right here, this not quite 0, this is half-meter steps, which is very good if you need to do something really precise but you don't want full control. This 0 actually has 2 different modes depending on the build piece that you're using. You'll notice that it's not smooth. It is still moving in these little itty-bitty increments. I don't know how much this is, but it's very small. Certain other build pieces, when you use them, usually off-grid pieces, if I have this set to 0, and then I move along, it's gonna be smooth. And then if I go into another piece, it may or may not adapt to be smooth, or it may give us these increments. So different pieces have different internal mechanics, and you're gonna have to play around with it and find out which ones do what. Next thing, I am currently building on 4x4 meter grids, right? If I don't want to do that, say I want to use this, but I want only half-meter increments, or 2-meter increments, then I can do this. So now I can get a T-junction over here, T-junction over here, T-junction over here, and I've created these 2 doors that have absolutely nothing to do with what the grid wants me to be doing when I'm on 4 meters. See, we've got a half step right here, and this can be very useful for creating more dynamic buildings, but that is something for later. So you can reduce this all the way down to 1 meter, but you can't get it any smaller. So you can do these 1 meter steps. Your grid pieces are going to build on one side or the other, as we've seen already through here. I prefer, when I know that I'm going to be using a gridded roof, to build with all of the grid pieces facing the inside line of the box that I'm making. So like this. So you'll see that it's on the inside, the yellow line is facing the outside, yellow line is facing the outside. And then when I go to put my roof on, it's actually going to behave itself, because this is also sitting on the inside line of the grid. So you can get that. So, simple things. I'm going to exit this group and delete it because I don't need this anymore. So these are your grid size grid pieces. All of this becomes available once you actually set a grid. When you're initially just putting a piece down, it doesn't recognize, it doesn't matter. Select grid. Select grid is useful for varying things, but not so much in this tool. I'll show you other places where it's useful. Auto stacking. So auto stacking is a very annoying feature, but it can help you build faster. So you'll see that instead of moving inside the object, it stacks on top. That's all that does. Align to water. So if I want to build a piece out here and I've got align to water on, it will treat the water as if it is a surface. This is mostly useful when you're using like water plants like lilies and stuff like that, but it can be useful for other things. Align to surface does the same thing, except for the surface. So it treats the surface as the flat object. I'm not rotating that, that's the game. And as it goes along this curve, you'll see that it's going at different angles. When you first start building, like say you pull out a this non-gridded 4 meter by 2 meter painted wall, if you have aligned a surface on and you start building over here, it is going to mess up your widget, which we will get to in a second. So I recommend turning this off until you have your pieces set, or building with the grid, because like I said, it doesn't care what the rotation is, it's not going to rotate. Random rotation does exactly what the name says. You place down a piece, and then it randomly rotates it, and you get another piece. Sometimes it rotates it a little, sometimes it rotates it a little, sometimes it rotates it a lot. It just depends. Random rotation all is a very exciting button. I'm just gonna turn this on real quick. So I have it there, and now it's sideways. And now it's doing its whole other thing. This is great for rock work, and nothing else. I mean, you may have better use with it with other things, but I use it for rock work. So that's this panel. There is occasionally a secondary other panel. This one just shows you your tags. Sometimes the second panel actually does things. So this is all the stuff that you basically need to know for using this set of controls. Let's talk about the widget a little bit more. So I'm going to leave that. So once again, when I load up a new piece, if I don't have random rotation on, it's going to automatically align to the game's internal grid. So this widget has 3 modes. No, it has a whole bunch of settings. So this widget has different tools that you can use directly on it. So red is going to move you along this way, blue is going to move you along this way. Red and blue moves you along this plane rather than that line, but it won't let you move upward. You know, red and green is a combination of the two, moves you along the plane, not the line. If you want to move this piece and you don't want to have to do it with this widget, you have a surface move, click the surface move, and it will treat it as if you just clicked the part. Next, toggle from translate to rotate. You can do this very simply by hitting the X button on your keyboard instead of having to push this little button right here. Reset rotation to the world axis. So if I had it like here, it'll reset it to the world axis. So this is handy if you click something. So if you pull a piece out and you realize too late that you had random rotation on, you can hit this reset rotation to world axis, and it will reset it off of whatever off-kilter angle that it has loaded it in on. Next, you have this button right here, toggle from relative to world axis. So if I rotate this, the relative axis, you have this blue along this plane, which aligns with the piece. Green is 90 degrees from it. Red is 90 degrees, but, you know, rotating around, up and down, and doing a barrel roll. Relative to world axis toggles the widget to treat the world axis as your guide rather than the piece. This can be useful. Let's say that I have this item, but I want to move it like over here. You know, create this kind of catty corner thing. This can be useful for that, and then let's say that I want to have these corners line up. I can toggle it off of world to relative, and now I can align it like this. So that's all of the different buttons on the widget tool. Again, on the gridded pieces, you don't get this. You get this version right here, and then when you hit X, you only have the green circle to rotate around. All the buttons are the same, but you just have that limited functionality because you can't barrel roll. So that's all of your pieces. That's all of your widget tools. All of this stuff is fairly basic. What's more important is learning how to use this so that you save yourself a lot of heartache. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's say that I want to build a building for a pier here, right? I'm going to use this panel, and let's say that I don't realize that I've got surface move on, or align to surface on. So I start building, and I think that right about here, I'm probably level, right? So I start building, and everything's looking okay. And I'm building this box. And it's cattywampus. So, this means that when I go and load in new pieces, or if I try to attach it to the grid, funky things are gonna happen. So, managing those settings helps. I prefer to start with some defaults. So every time that I build something, I'm going to do a set of default actions that are going to set me up and make building a lot easier. So let's get out our painted panel again. Let's double check and make sure that none of our align to anything is on. It's not. Next thing, make sure that angle snap is on. So I've got it attached to the world axis, and now I'm going to make that same box that we had before. Instead of pulling along the lines, I'm going to rotate like this. I'm going to pull down until it matches the edge. It goes just a little bit past it. And I'm going to pull out, and I'm going to match it up again. So now I've got this nice, clean looking angle. Nothing's clipping, nothing's glitching through each other. And now I can select both of these, merge these together as a group, and now I'm just working with one singular object when building. So I'll click into it, and let's say that I want this to be a full box, not just an L shape. So when I do that, this widget has rotated off the universal grid. I can choose to toggle from relative to world axis and rotate along that way. That's a choice. Or I can take this version of the widget, which is an average of your pieces. That's very important. The widget is going to average along whatever you've built. So, for example, if I take this and I move it just a little bit out for whatever reason, and I want to select all of these again, my widget has moved. It's at these weird angles, right? It's off center, and it is rotating along the corner, kind of. Let me single snap off again. Here we go. It's rotating around the corner, but when I go to line things up, it's going to be all the way over here. And that's because it's using an average, right? So these two, their average should be a 45-degree angle. I will know that when I rotate it 90 degrees, and I pull down, and I move it to the spot that I want it at. Now I hit check. So when I go and I select all of these pieces again, it should, and it doesn't. You would think that it would go back to being relative to the world axis, but it doesn't. So I can toggle back to the world axis, and I can move, or I can duplicate and advance move. Now I can do this. Having your settings organized using the grid and recognizing when you're off the world axis and moving back to, like, between relative and world axis for your widget can be very useful. So hopefully that acts as a little bit of help in case you're feeling intimidated. Hopefully that explains what all these buttons are doing. There is a couple of things I want to talk about real quick that I forgot to mention. The first one being position snap, and the second one being position snap rotation. So I was like 4 months ago, years old, when I figured out how to use these two buttons properly. They're not obvious. So I'm going to pull out this bamboo painted wall, and I'm going to hit position snap. There are key points on this object, hopefully, usually on the gridded pieces. Let me pull out one of those. There we go. Where if I hover over it, it's going to want to snap to specific positions. So for example, if I want to use this 1x2 jagged topper, I just need to hover over it and it will snap to these positions. And that's all snap position does. Every object has its own snap position accompaniment. This can be very useful. For example, if I'm building with this and, you know, actually, let me use something that's not gonna... Oh, I'll build with this panel. So let's say that I want to attach this panel to this object, but I don't know that this is truly on the world axis, right? So I'm going to hover over it, and then I can use my widget to move it and hit adjacent. I can also do this with align to surface. So for example, I take out my panel, I say align to surface, I take off position snap, my goodness. So now it's going to T-junction with this object, and now I can rotate it and get it to match. By having the snap, I know exactly what degrees I'm moving it to. I'm not getting anything cattywampus. So, position snap rotation let's say that I have my bamboo pieces again. I'm gonna get out this wall. I'm gonna exit the grid, and I'm just gonna randomly rotate it. There. So if I pull out my 1 meter jagged, yeah, it's kind of there. It's kind of right. Pull out my position snap, and you'll see that it's crooked. It's a little bit off because this piece is not actually to the world. Position snap rotation forces it to align to specific positioning. Now this one is not doing it, and that's because position snap rotation and position snap are finicky tools, but they can be useful shortcuts depending on how you use them. You can get this and just repeat in infinitum. The next thing is going to be duplicating specific objects and doing advanced movement. So this has taken me out of it because I selected a grid piece and I selected duplicate and advance. So now it's going to duplicate and advance this entire group. Individual pieces, though, that are not on the grid, when I hit duplicate and advance, now it's just moving the individual piece. That was already fairly obvious, but let's say that I want to repeat this entire thing over and over for like a wall. I'll just select the whole thing, duplicate, and I can do that. Which is way easier than trying to build a 4 meter panel. Getting our Getting our 1 meter jagged panel, which when I click it in, it's going to be on this exact same widget anchor point. Which, again, each piece has its own widget anchor point. There are similarities and repetitions, but they're not always the same. Sometimes it's in the center, sometimes it's on a bottom, sometimes it's on an edge, sometimes it's off the part. There's a couple of African pieces that are like that. So now I've got this individual short little wall. I want to repeat it. So I can do it this way. Things are going to be a little bit cattywampus. I might have to deal with my spacing a little bit. By using a gridded piece alongside this, however. So let's say that I did something like that. So now along each individual gridded piece, I'm going to get replications of my non-gridded parts. I can then delete all of my gridded pieces, and I now have this exact spacing duplicated wall. Hopefully these give you some ideas, a little bit of an insight into all of the building tools that we have available. I'm sure that this is going to be incredibly chaotic. I'm not used to doing tutorials yet, so hopefully I will get good and these will be less confusing. Yeah, so anyway, next time we will be talking about how to build the world's most basic building and then make it look good. Instead of just dealing with all the build tools, we're going to actually put them to use. So, hope you join me for that. Have a great day, and good luck building.